Okay, 5, 4.
Hi, everybody. It is March 9th, 2022, and this is the third in a series of classes as an introduction to Lyndon LaRouche. This class is on the machine tool principle, and the teachers tonight are going to be Cade Levinson and Bill Ferguson. I'm Jason Ross. I'm going to be reading your questions, moderating, and giving a short introduction of just where the world stands right now, considering how incredibly hot and explosive, hopefully not too explosive, the world situation is. The Russian special military operation in Ukraine continues, and it is giving pause to countries like Poland that are trying to send increased military supplies into Ukraine. As just an example of one of the latest things that occurred, Poland said it wanted to send over some of its MiG fighters to Ukraine via the United States, which the United States nixed, saying this is going to be a World War III situation. If we send in planes, Russians shoot down a US plane, US planes shoot down a Russian plane, or US controlled planes shoot down a Russian plane, where does that go? That goes potentially extremely quickly to World War III, which could become rapidly a nuclear, deadly, civilization-ending war. It's not a cavalier thing to suggest that more weapons should be sent to Ukraine. Really, the effect of these arms shipments will be to prolong the conflict, kill more Ukrainians, and very unlikely to change the outcome unless they're sent in great numbers and truly do risk a third world war. Now, Lyndon LaRouche warned back in 2011 when the NATO-US operation against Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi took place, an operation that killed Gaddafi, led to chaos in Libya that continues till this day, and which LaRouche warned in 2011 would lead to, or was part of, a planned military progression towards conflict with Russia. The reason? Both the obvious reasons, or more clear reasons that are well represented among alternative viewpoints today, namely that Russia represents a threat to Anglo-American hegemony along with China. The other reason, which LaRouche identified in 2011, is that the financial system is bankrupt and that it would be through war to create a reset of that financial system. You already see today how inflation, which we all know had been occurring already, is now being blamed on Putin. And indeed, the shutdowns of trade, etc., caused by the conflict are causing supply shortages. They are driving inflation to some degree, but they're not the sole driver of it. This is a financial system that has turned towards speculation and finance rather than physical economy, against which LaRouche had warned for decades, and which now is just running up against a wall of essentially almost vertical hyperinflationary blowout. So that's where we are today. It's more important than ever to understand how LaRouche thought about economics, how he developed his forecasting method, and what he tells us that we can accomplish today. So I will turn things over now to our two teachers this evening, Bill Ferguson and Cade Levinson. And Cade Levinson will be kicking us off. Take it away, Cade.
Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight's topic is the machine tool principle in LaRouche's work. And I kind of wanted to start here by just sharing a quote from one of the papers in the Sunday sectionals that we're doing along with this class series. We read the first sectional was on the paper on LaRouche's discovery by LaRouche. I wanted to share a brief paragraph from that paper that I think puts the machine tool principle very directly, shows where it functions within LaRouche's general idea of economy. Here. I think this is it. Can this be seen all right? All right, so if you can't see, I'm just going to read it anyway. So this is the opening paragraph of On LaRouche's Discovery. The central feature of my original contribution to the Leibniz science of physical economy is the provision of a method for addressing the causal relationship between, on the one side, individuals' contributions to axiomatically revolutionary advances in scientific and analogous forms of knowledge, and on the other side, consequent increases in the potential population density of corresponding societies. In its application to political economy, my method focuses analysis upon the central role of the following three-step sequence. First, axiomatically revolutionary forms of scientific and analogous discovery. Second, consequent advances in machine tool and analogous principles. Finally, consequent advances in the productive powers of labor. So it's not exactly in the same order, but these first three classes, we've kind of gone through those three steps in LaRouche's method, where Daniel and Jason presented on the creative powers of the human mind, which provide those essential scientific discoveries of principle. And Paul Gallagher last week did his presentation on the physical production process, the productive powers of labor. And this week, we're going to go into kind of the fulcrum between the two, the turning point, which is the machine tool principle and the machine tool design principle. And I think one way to put this neatly is it's in machine tools where you see the most direct physical effect from one of these fundamental principle discoveries start to affect the productive process generally in an applied way. And so one of the topics I kind of want to speak about generally to frame this entire approach to economy that produces these results of LaRouche's discovery is the difference between Leibniz's analysis situs and generally what you'll see is systems analysis from types like Norbert Wiener or John von Neumann in the kind of cybernetic era of the early mid 20th century of Anglo-American academic thought. And I think what's the best way to kind of frame those two and how they differentiate from each other is that in this, it's how they approach knowledge. And I would say it's in this viewpoint of analysis situs that you get actual knowledge, whereas in systems analysis, you get just a kind of gossip between people. You don't really access the full powers of human language and creativity. So to put in perspective what these two sort of systems of thought you could say are, is that with analysis situs, which in some ways developed into the field of topology, but that would be like I think a limited way of interpreting this field. It's where you frame the entirety of what you are dealing with within a kind of theory of hypothesis. That is, that the effects that you are looking into or observing, those are taken into a general framework of human thought and the sort of dimensionality produced by breakthroughs in human thought. One way that LaRouche uses the 19th century German geometer Bernard Riemann's work in continuous manifolds is to kind of represent this idea of an analysis situs, especially at a point of a fundamental breakthrough discovery by a kind of shorthand of like a +1 to the manifold you're working with. So in your everyday kind of mathematical physics or a mathematical view of space-time, you have the 3+1 dimensionality of textbook kind of space-time. But if you situate that within a framework that includes the idea of hypothesis kind of underlying the ability to observe different positions within space-time, that you have to work from a kind of more background layer of what is being proposed in one's presumptions of the makeup of space-time, you can get certain fundamental breakthroughs that produce a new dimensionality that one's working with. And so you get a kind of a system of functions that include hypothesis and not just positions within space-time. And one thing I kind of want to just show here to get a bit of a firmer sense of what a machine tool is and how it relates to this, and I think Bill will be developing this topic a bit further, is I just want to show a quick video of a 20 kilowatt laser cutting machine tool from YouTube real quick that I'll do screen share for as well. All right, so you can see here this. So what a machine tool is and it would be an example of one, is that one way to put it is that it's a machine that creates machines, and it's mostly done through the processes of metal cutting or metal forming or bending. And the limit of your machine tool design, of what you're able to design and the capacity of your machine tools, it kind of sets the bar for further into the productive process, what you're able to produce and at what rate of efficiency and at what utilization of the workforce kind of per capita and what they're able to put out. So as you can see here, this is an example of a laser machine tool that you can make intricate designs with. And I just want to skip to here where it's you have 1 second. 80 millimeters of carbon steel. It's able to cut through and form and shape. So you can see the sort of an intense amount of power utilized in this kind of machine tool design, which is incommensurable in some degree to what you'd be able to do before the development of this kind of technology. And so I think a reason to focus on something like the machine tool principle is to sort of differentiate the scope of physical economy as practiced by LaRouche, and then general economics, which is rightfully called a dismal science when it doesn't hit the same point of principle as physical economy. Because something you see both in the abstractions of either Keynesian sort of neoclassical economics, as well as in Marxist economics, as well as going back to the classical political economy of Ricardo or Adam Smith, is you get an all too abstract version of the economy generally, but especially in regards to things like capital and labor. So for Marx, you have things like the abstract labor time, which is the sort of central valuing function, or in the labor theory of value, you have that as sort of the metric of how you imbue value into a commodity through this totally abstracted labor time, which ends up as exchange value, as well as I think you can look at it as in similar light of GDP style metrics in contemporary popular economics. And what both those approaches miss out is where these creative discoveries of human thought can have a fundamental impact on this productive capacity through a machine tool design and the subsequent consequences of implementing it. And I think this is, if you remember Paul's class from last week, he mentioned that one title he was thinking of having for it is that the rate of profit also rises. And I think it's in here where you see how you can have this anti-entropic effect in the productive capacity of labor as these machine tool designs increase in their power and their ability, stemming from, as said throughout here, these fundamental discoveries of physical principle. So one other quote I want to read here is from LaRouche's The Machine Tool Principle, The Brains of Profit, which talks about the kind of effects of ignoring the importance of the machine tool sector within your physical economy as a whole. And I'm just going to read it direct here. It's the turn of Germany's and US firms to outsourcing instead of fostering domestic machine tool design resources is a kindred show of managerial incompetence. Buying components from a market which has low density machine tool design fertility is such an obvious blunder of buying into assured obsolescence that the practice could be condoned only by boards of directors which lack both the mental ability to remember yesterday and to foresee tomorrow. The principle is, do not think of this as a matter of buying products. It is a matter of buying change. When you buy a product, are you also buying into the quality of change you will need for tomorrow? Are you buying into yesterday or tomorrow? Production and successful national economy are both all about technological change. Therefore, the board of directors member or operating executive who does not understand that should be fired with the same sense of urgency prompted by the detection of a chronic embezzler, pyromaniac, or axe murderer in those positions. And what that's speaking to is the compounding result of investment and advancement within the machine tool design sector, where it's not just the production of one better machine tool that then you can reap the benefits thereof, and that's kind of it. It's encouraging a process of a whole system of revitalization and change as you develop your process of hypothesis and your results and principled discoveries. So an example of one way that this had been implemented historically was in Walter Reuther's proposal to the FDR's administration on the verge of World War II, where he was a founder and a president of the United Auto Workers and worked for GM, I believe. And he proposed for the industrial capacity that would be necessary in order to effectively fight in World War II, that basically the entirety of the American auto manufacturing sector be retooled in order to produce the aircraft and the other sort of aviation technologies that would be necessary to win the war. He called this the arsenal of democracy. And by using this retooling process, by taking the existing infrastructure and redesigning it towards these the different ends demanded by the times, you was able to cut down the amount of time needed to produce the amount of planes needed for the war from 18 months to 6 months. And as some might have heard from in Paul Gallagher's class last week, this sort of focus on innovation was a main component of the FDR administration. And those who joined us for Sunday's section on the paper where FDR was interrupted see how it was exactly the interruption, this kind of design, especially at the machine tool level process, that that foretold our general fall into the general spiraling collapse we have in our physical economy at the moment. And I think one place where you can contrast what Walter Reuther did with the FDR administration was what happened with General Motors at the time of the TARP bailout in the Obama years, where members of ERR, including Richard Freeman, who gave valuable help for this presentation, had presented a proposal for the retooling of the American auto sector toward high-speed and eventually maglev rail, kind of in the same vein as what was done by Walter Reuther leading into World War II. But instead of that, you had this sort of financialized bailout of General Motors, which was touted as a key result of the Obama years, but ended up basically turning General Motors not into an auto manufacturing company anymore, but into a financial company, just used as another sort of pawn within a game of debt shuffling. And everything you've seen in the last couple of years, from the negative results of just-in-time supply chain design, as we saw during the pandemic, where we had shortages from that, and what we can see in the future from that, come directly as a result of the negligence of this machine tool sector. But what you had throughout the outsourcing years of the 90s and the bailout years of the 2000s and the 80s sort of Bain capital years of liquidation of these different manufacturing plants is essentially you have the liquidation of the economic body of the nation, equivalent to what happens if you have Ebola, like the organs of the nation's economy become liquidated in a certain way. In some ways, it's like selling your kidneys in order to meet the next month's rent or something like that. But to bring one more focus on this idea of continuous change within the machine tool sector, I want to give one more quote from Richard Freeman here from his article, The Collapse of the Machine Tool Principle, that gets another firm focus on this idea of the machine tool sector as a fulcrum of continuous change, kind of relaying the advancements in conceptual thought and principled breakthroughs to the productive powers of labor. And so the quote starts here. I want to plant an idea into your head to stimulate a mental concatenation of ideas. Scientists such as Wernher von Braun and others originate the concept of space travel totally in their minds, involving new physical principles. There is nothing physical that exists yet. So the scientist conceives of a spacecraft with specifications, and much work goes into that. But to make that spacecraft, he has to have hundreds of specially built or modified machine tools to machine the specific functions without which the spacecraft could not be built. Moreover, the engineers building the spacecraft will work with master mechanics who have decades of experience and will know what type of machine tool needs to be constructed to, in turn, build the spacecraft. So the scientists, the engineers, and the master machinists, through discussions, traverse back and forth in their heads the product designs, both of the spacecraft and of the machine tools that will build the spacecraft. Then they incorporate these advanced designs into the machines. In this way, the advanced designs increase man's power over nature. And then one thing I just want to comment upon, and then I'll turn things over to Bill, is when you get a sense of this machine tool principle, it completely invalidates this sort of utopian notion I think you see in both certain formations of left labor politics, but also then sort of techno-futurist politics as well, that sort of, I think, mystify the advancement in technology in negative and positive ways. So from the Luddite, but to the same result, basically, in like the Luddite labor sort of tendency, which Henry George was definitely a member thereof. You have this idea that the increasing development of technology and increasing development of complexity and capacity and machine tools, that will just eliminate the need for labor in a certain way, and it will cause massive unemployment, and this general topic of automation that you'll maybe hear sometimes as being pushed as a political focal point. And I think you see on the other end the same thing in sort of techno-futurist circles, where they imagine the same thing with automation, but they see it as a good thing. It's like, oh, well, we won't need to do these lowly, manual labor processes anymore, and everything can just be run by artificial intelligence and machines. But when you get a strong conception of this machine tool design principle, you see how in that necessity of continuous change within the sector, you have to constantly be employing the capacities of the labor force in the topmost way in order to keep kind of the ball rolling. And that includes advancements in the education of the labor force and an increase in the skills of the labor force in order to take most advantage of the developments from the principal discovery to the machine tool sector. And so that's to counter sort of that left approach to it to a certain way, but to counter the right heresy a little bit, I'd like to give an anecdote from that Richard Feynman talked to me about, where it's very similar. If you ever heard about Einstein, when he was stuck on a problem in physics, would often go to his violin and play some classical music to help think through what the problem he was stuck on. And I was told about a friend Richard Feynman had, where he was an engineer and designer, and if he was stuck on a problem, his go-to is that he'd go back to a factory that he used to work at and just sort of work around the machine tools to a certain degree. So, and that's just to put a focus that there's a certain physical knowledge in these actual points of production that you can't eliminate through abstraction and through categories. There's a certain necessity of interacting with the physical production process to be a fully developed citizen and have a fully developed coherence of thought. And with that, I'll turn things over here.
All right, Bill, you want to take things up? Oh, and also let me add, as moderator here, that we are going to be switching over to Q&A and discussion. After Bill's presentation, we'll be able to take people directly from Zoom. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. You do not have to unmute your video to ask a question. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, then you can put things in the YouTube chat there. In any event, you can also send your questions to questions@laroucheorganization.com, including if you're watching this show when it's recorded as opposed to live, and we'll be able to get back to you as well. So Bill Ferguson. Hey there, Bill.
The usual, the usual. Okay, you can hear me okay?
Sure.
All right, well, let me start with the quote from one of the papers that was mentioned by Lynn. Machine tool design, the brains of profit. LaRouche says, the point is that for any national economy taken as a unified whole, scientific and classical artistic progress combined are the only source of sustainable profit, nothing else. The machine tool sector illustrates the role of science in this. For the imperiled economy of the United States and of many other nations today, the lesson told is a desperately urgent one, even if it appears to address only technological progress as such. And then one more. This is from Return to the Machine Tool Principle, which I believe was written in '96. In science and in history, the delusions of blind faith in simple, self-evident facts exist only in the minds of the brutishly illiterate and the sophists. True facts, like highways, do not exist in empty space. The first step toward truth may be the recognition that roads, rather than existing as self-evident facts, may be represented inadequately as situated within a well-defined physical geography. In truth, today, roads and railroads, like shipping lanes and all other artifacts, are selected, developed, and used by mankind as part of a physical economic geography, including the physical economy of warfare. In truth, as parts of corridors essential for the efficient linking of nodal points of a national and world economy. Similarly, machine tools come into existence and aroused as expressions of an historically situated phase of world and national processes of economic, cultural, and demographic development. In economy, nothing, including a machine tool, can be competently defined as a fact without first situating its existence within that functionally historical setting in the course of which it appears and is later superseded by a better one. This principle of scientific method was identified by Gottfried Leibniz by such rubrics as analysis cetus. Cade, if you could help me out, the figure 11, put that on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to use this diagram that occurs in a couple of different locations to illustrate, to give an outline of this process of the machine tool principle. Now, recall that Lynn said that scientific and classical artistic progress combined are the only source of sustainable profit, nothing else. I hope you understand by that he doesn't mean monetary profit. He means profit in the sense of the parameters that we have discussed in previous classes, in the sense of increasing the ratio of free energy to energy of the system, increasing the ratio of net surplus, the S prime over C plus V, or more broadly in the sense of anti-entropy as a principle of human economy and is a principle of self-development in the universe. So hopefully I'll get across to you how this process illustrated in the chart is the principle of human creativity is the same principle that's governing the universe. Now, if you see at the beginning, first of all, the title, how the machine tool principle is situated. Now, right at the beginning, you have current levels of development of individual creative reason. And then you have the process as it's described. And then at the bottom, higher levels of development of individual creative reason. Now, maybe that's the bottom of the balance sheet. You measure your profit there, higher levels of development of individual creative reason. So this is the subject of the machine tool principle. This is the substance of the principle, the development of individual creative reason. And all the artifacts that get generated in the process, like the machine tools, the roads, the railroads, and shipping lanes, they result from that process and they serve that purpose. So again, starting with at the beginning here. First box, current levels of development of individual creative reason. Say that's where we are. Now you have the arrow, and then boom, discoveries of valid principles. Now the valid principles come from creative thinkers, investigators, scientists, and others. And I'm going to focus on a couple of them. Well, I want to mention three areas, but focus on two characters in particular in this process. First is Max Planck, and the other is Albert Einstein. Now, Max Planck, he was presented with experimental results that contradicted an otherwise successful theory of electromagnetic radiation. These were experiments to measure what's known as black body radiation. What is the profile of the radiation of electromagnetic waves at different wavelengths from a heated body that does not reflect, it's not reflecting radiation from elsewhere. All the radiation coming from it is being emitted from it. Now, the theory that predominated then, I think it was called the Rayleigh-Jeans theory, was very good at matching up with experiment when it came to frequencies below a certain level. I think it was 10 to the 5th gigahertz. But when the frequencies were higher than that, everything blew up. All the predictions were, and of course this wasn't true, predictions were that the radiation coming from a heated body, the energies of the radiation of short wavelengths would become infinite. And of course, the existence of the human race kind of contradicts that. So obviously that one didn't work. And there was a careful series of experiments that were done. They had just developed the technology for testing this. And this is an important question. This is the beginning of the industrial age in Germany, and they're just beginning to use electricity. And for example, if you want to create an effective light bulb, you want maximum light, in the frequencies that are visible, and you want minimum heat. So now, confronted with this situation, Max Planck decided to say, well, what's the real character of this radiation profile? And I mean, he can't. If you read the Planck's scientific autobiography, he admits that he was basically trying to come up with a mathematical function that would fit the curve that was presented by experiment. And what he comes up with is this idea that this electromagnetic radiation, which it's been shown over and over and over again, the wave theory of light, the wave theory of electromagnetic radiation works very well. It fits the experimental results, but not in this case. So what does he do? He decides that, well, if I represent the waves, the radiation in this black body experiment as coming in discrete units or quanta, which is this is the opposite of waves in quanta, then he gets a curve that fits beautifully with experiment. Now, he was quite hesitant to just go from there and say, well, light comes in packets, light's in particles. And he figured somebody might come up with a better idea anyway, afterwards. But this was known as the quantum of least action, and it's associated with this quantity known as Planck's constant. But it's the quantum of least action, remember that. Now, Einstein, who's a complete revolutionary, he runs with this idea. He's not worried about whether or not it's unseemly to think of radiation. Since everybody knows electromagnetic propagation comes in waves, how dare you talk about packets, quanta, like bullet-like light? Einstein didn't care. So he applies this idea of quantized light to another anomalous experiment or phenomenon, the photoelectric effect. When metal plates were exposed to certain frequencies of light, I mean, differences depending on the metal and depending on the light frequencies, the plates would become charged. And this would indicate that electrons were being knocked out of their orbits, and they would collect on the surface of the plate. But it only happened at certain frequencies. And that seemed to also didn't make sense with this wave theory of light, because it wasn't a question of how much energy, quote unquote, was being pumped into the situation. In other words, you could, let's take red light as a lower frequency than blue light. And if you shine the red light, no matter how intense, no matter the volume, the amount of light that's hitting the plate, this phenomenon of charging didn't happen. But with blue light, even if it was a low intensity, this phenomenon would be observed. The blue light would cause the electrons to be popped out of their place and along the surface of the metal. So Einstein was able to explain that effect. In fact, that's what he got his Nobel Prize for, not for relativity. Now, Max Planck, of course, he also got a Nobel Prize for this development of the quantum. Now, this is an example, or these are examples of this discoveries of valid principles. These were new principles. And after these principles and others came into currency in science, the world was completely different. In other words, if you have a text, the grand textbook of all truth from 1899. And then you compared it to the grand textbook of all truth of 1906, it was completely different. This was what you call a scientific revolution. Now, you see the next box after the discoveries of valid principles. You have discoveries of valid new hypotheses. Well, here Lynn uses the term hypothesis different in a different manner than a lot of people, at least the way I was taught about it. When he says valid new hypothesis, he's talking about a whole system. You could say a whole system of principles, or well, you can describe it in terms of the theorem lattice. But well, let me give you an example. I'm not going to use anything fancy here. Do you see that X there? Okay, you have two straight lines. Now, the top and bottom angles formed, and the left and right angles, they're equal. I think this is called the vertical angle theorem. And this is a theorem of plane geometry. If you're dealing with a Euclidean, well, this is basically a theorem of Euclid's geometry, and it's a characteristic of a flat plane geometry. So this is a theorem. This is something that's provably true by the method of deduction from the axioms and postulates of Euclid's elements. Now, I wish I had a better example for you, but let me see if I can. Kynan, do you have that other? I sent you a picture, a second email. Did you get that? Might be easier to. Do you have it there?
I think Cade's about to show it. Let's see.
Well, I'll give you. You see the X on this quote unquote sphere? You see the same thing. You see two lines. You see two lines that create those four angles at a vertex, and okay, that's much better. Okay, thank you. This angle and this angle are equal. This angle and this angle are equal. This angle and this angle. So again, you have this vertical angle theorem. It's true on a sphere. So in spherical geometry, this is also a valid theorem. Now, of course, we all know that on a flat plane in Euclidean geometry, the sum of the angles, another theorem is that the sum of the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. And that's a characteristic of plane geometry. That's a theorem of plane geometry. Now, on a sphere, however, you see see this green triangle? It's made of these three great circles corresponding to the three sides of a triangle. But this angle is 90 degrees, and this angle is 90 degrees, and this angle is 90 degrees. In fact, in the geometry of the sphere, the angles of a triangle are always greater. They always add up to something greater than 180 degrees. If you brought these two sides together, this would be 90, this would be 90, and even if you got this down to 1 or below, it would still be more than 180 degrees. So I'm pointing this out to show you that you have these different hypotheses. This is the hypothesis of a sphere and the hypothesis of a plane. It's different. There's a different theorem lattice for each one, even though some of the theorems may be true in both. They are distinct. And the hypothesis is the one from which the many theorems come. So again, I want to make this point because what's happening when Lynn refers to valid new hypotheses, it's a bit different than just a new discovery or a new principle. And if you think about it, and I should mention with the solution to this black body problem, they called it the ultraviolet catastrophe, this idea that all the short wavelengths would generate the infinite amount of energy and everybody would be fried, so we'd never exist in the first place. That's a paradox. A paradox in a system, a hypothesis about the physical universe that worked very well. But in that instance, it breaks down. Not true. The universe, I should back up a bit here, because this principle that I'm talking about, this principle of human development and the principle of the universe that governs the universe, we've often mentioned the fact that they're the same. Well, I would venture that you can put this in terms of Socratic dialogue. In human development, there's a Socratic dialogue going on with the universe, where the universe is doing what it's doing, and then we're observing and we're testing, and we say, oh, well, you're doing this, you're doing that. And then you come up with your theorem lattice about how the universe works. And then the universe decides to say, nuh-uh, bam. Or even better, as you're researching, you decide, okay, I think I know what I'm doing here. Why don't I push the limits and see if it's always true? Where does it break down? Okay, so you have this this black body radiation example. That's a paradox. Didn't make sense. Plunk comes up with this elegant mathematical model that describes it perfectly and creates this new concept of the quantum. And then, of course, Einstein applies it to another paradox, the photoelectric effect, because electrons shouldn't be popping around like that. If they're going to be discharged by a little bit of blue light, then they ought to be discharged by a lot of red light. But it doesn't work that way. But it makes sense if light is quantized. So this is a revolution. Now, I don't want to give short shrift to the nuclear phenomenon. I can mention that because I think this has also got to be included, but there's so many different people involved. But like I said, the world before 1900 and the world after 1900, or even take it to 1905, completely different. Now, of course, Einstein had these 4 papers that he had published in 1905, where he's just revolutionizing everything. The photoelectric effect paper revolutionized our concept of electromagnetic radiation. Then the paper on Brownian motion, that's where he was able to explain the phenomenon that had been observed by a Scottish botanist Robert Brown, I believe. You know, he's looking under his microscope at these seeds, these very light seeds, and they're bouncing around like crazy, and he doesn't understand why. And Einstein explained that by saying that, well, there's water. Water's made up of molecules that bounce around because of thermal agitation. And this was like one of the final confirmations of the idea that matter is made up of molecules and atoms, which was not a generally accepted concept at the time. Then, of course, we know about the relativity. Won't go into that a lot, but Einstein as a kid had asked himself, well, suppose I could go at the speed of light, and there's a beam of light shooting across the sky, and I'm flying along with it at the speed of light. What am I going to see when I look over? And that was paradoxical. Now, I mean, he was an unusual kid, but how do you solve that? It makes no sense from the standpoint of I don't want to use the term classical. That's what they call classical, but it's not what I think of as classical. But say pre-relativity physics. Doesn't make any sense. Now he was able to solve that with his theory of relativity. And make a long story short, there's another paradox solved, and out of that, the second paper he on relativity that year was it gave us the famous equation E equals mc squared, which everybody knows, even if they don't know what they're talking about. And they know that it somehow shows that something like a nuclear bomb is possible and would take matter and release a tremendous amount of energy. So these two, and others, of course, like the discoverers of nuclear decay. And well, I'll just leave it at that. They completely revolutionized science. And out of this, now let's see, I was at, can you go back to the chart? Well, so while we're waiting for the chart, let me mention something. You remember the first class when Jason was almost at a loss for words to describe how evil Bertrand Russell is? You may recall that. Now, Jason wrote a article that I had a hard time finding, but I did find it finally. And it was, let me get the exact title. What did I do with this? Yeah. The title of his article was Bertrand Russell in 1895 preordains that the quantum and relativity will never be discovered. This is a paper about Bertrand Russell, who writes this attack on Bernhard Riemann, who is a necessary predecessor to Albert Einstein and Max Planck. He argues that this idea, he basically is attacking the concept of Bernhard Riemann's paper on the hypotheses that underlie geometry. The idea that there could be any kind of geometry other than the well-proven Euclidean concept of space. So, I mean, not only was Bertrand Russell doing that, but he was also part of the project to reduce all of mathematics to logic, or to try to, and to eventually reduce all of science to mathematics. So you're reducing it to logic, so you could basically create a machine to generate history, so human beings are just machines or irrelevant, to eliminate that the idea of human creativity. Now back to the chart here. Okay. So when I say valid new hypotheses, let's take the atomic world, or the post relativity quantum revolutionary world, which we live in now. Reason I focused on Einstein and Plunk is because I wanted to make a point about a machine tool that didn't exist, that exists specifically directly because of the revolution that was created by Einstein and Planck. Well, one of them is the laser. And we saw, I have a picture of a laser, but we don't need to see it because we just saw a very exciting video about a laser machine tool. And laser means light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. And basically the way it works is you have you set up a chamber or a zone of a substance like ruby. Well, they started with rubies and now they can do it with gases and different chemicals and so forth. And you hit it with a big flash of light. And then this flash of light stimulates, well, the word they use is excites. So it excites these electrons. So think about all these excited electrons. They're hopping out of their orbits in their, they were in the orbits in the gas or in the medium. And now they're hopping out of that orbit. And in this chamber, you just have a mirror, a full mirror on one side, and you have a half mirror on the other side. So when the light flashes and excites these electrons, they're stimulated and they're excited and they're bouncing around, and then the light's bouncing back and forth, so it's doing more and more, getting more electrons excited. But then when the excitement's over, the electrons pop back to where they belong, but they emit a photon. And so then you have more photons, except they're all emitting at the same frequency in the same phase. And they're in step. They're like a bunch of soldiers marching in exact step, as opposed to stomping around which way. So the light that was bouncing back and forth that's been stimulated, it's coherent. Well, you know the difference between the light from a light bulb and the light from a laser. So this laser machine tool that Cade showed you, that was specifically possible because of this valid new hypothesis, this valid principles that were discovered by Einstein and Planck. Now, what do you do with this machine tool? Well, you showed that you could use it to cut metal. You can use it for, there's thousands of applications, and I'm going to broaden the idea of the machine tool a bit. I'm going to take the liberty, because I think Paul did last week when he talked about the turbines as machine tools that generate electricity, because that powers everything. That runs all the machines. The laser, it's part of the, hopefully very soon, as we pursue it, lasers can be used to generate nuclear fusion power. The design for inertial confinement fusion, it involves taking a pellet of concentrated deuterium and tritium and zapping it with an extremely powerful pulse of lasers that surround it to generate the density and heat and confinement to generate a nuclear fusion reaction. And they've been working on that as well as the tokamaks. But this is could be part of the future that we're going to create in this process of development of mankind. Now, just to take further on this laser business, you see the next box, new and improved product designs. There are products that you wouldn't be able to make by using machine tools that just cut metal with metal. But because of the intensity of both the precision and the intensity of the light beam, there's other products that would be possible. Now I'm going to zip along here a little bit. This next box, infrastructure designs, productive processes, increasing capital intensity, increasing power intensity. In terms of the machine tool design, again, without the revolution in science, without this valid new hypothesis, I meant to mention this before. Obviously, the nuclear power plants that should be decorating the world, we should have thousands more as we proceed from, well, we work to solve all the problems that we're in right now, you know, to increase production, to speed up production, to make it feasible to feed the world, to make it possible to raise the population, devastated populations, to raise their standard of living up to a modern level. We need that power. And that power, which, I mean, we haven't been utilizing it, but needs to be put to these tasks, to these necessary human tasks. It's there because of this principle. Now, just quick on infrastructure designs. Well, you could use, there was a project called Operation Plowshare for using peaceful nuclear explosives for doing things like building canals. That's a possible infrastructure design that could be occurring on Earth and on other planets. LaRouche often discussed in the 70s and on this idea of a newplex. I remember the speech he gave where the way he described a newplex, it would be an industrial scientific city that was built around 2 nuclear power plants. But the beginning of the city was blast a hole, blast a big crater. So there's another example of this peaceful nuclear explosive. And then you clear it out and you build a city from the bottom up around this nuclear power plant system. This is the kind of thing that the human race needs done. This gives you a sense of the future of the machine tool principle. Now, there's probably more to say about that, and maybe we can address it in the Q&A, but I want to move over to this other side. Now, from the discoveries of valid new principles, we branched off to machine tools, new and improved product designs, infrastructure designs, etc. Oh, well, I should mention this. Increased power density, I think that's pretty clear. That once we went into the nuclear age, that we had the increase of the power intensity. And if we go into the age of nuclear fusion, as we go into the age of nuclear fusion, that's going to continue. But let's go back here, classical humanist education. Now, Cade mentioned that when Einstein got stumped on a problem, oftentimes he would go play the violin, think it through. Well, Max Planck was an accomplished pianist. In fact, he debated actually becoming a professional concert pianist. He was of that quality of a musician. That's all I'll say on that subject for now. But there should be there's a point made there. Now, classical humanist education. How do you educate someone that can make a discovery of a new scientific principle? Now, there's been very, very few people that have accomplished that. But what kind of education do you need to make available to make that happen? Again, we come back to this principle of Socratic dialogue. If you want to create people that can discover principles, and when we talk about the unique capability of the human mind, obviously the discovery of the principle is the paradigm. The way you get there is by an education. You don't do it by accumulating facts, accumulating knowledge, drill and grill, etc. The way to develop a creative mind is to cause the student to recreate the discoveries. And that was the basis of classical education. Again, it comes back to this question of Socratic dialogue, because in a Socratic dialogue, well, in an experiment, you're having your Socratic dialogue with the universe, with your experimental situation. You're also having a Socratic dialogue with people who preceded you, thinkers. You know, like if you're trying to understand relativity, you have to have a dialogue with Albert Einstein. Of course, you're having a dialogue with the other students in your class and with your teacher. But most importantly, you're having the dialogue with yourself. And it's not, sometimes Socratic dialogue is described as asking and answering questions. What it's really about is questioning what you believe are valid principles to find out something new, to find out where your principles are wrong. And then, I mean, the example I discussed, those are two pretty advanced examples. I think it was somebody asked a question in the first class, how do I develop agape? And I remember the first answer was to take up the classical music challenge. I would add to that, take up the geometry challenge. Like you can read the Meno dialogue of Plato up to the point where the slave boy gets stumped. Don't read past that until you solve the problem that Socrates poses of doubling the square. Don't deprive yourself of the benefit of racking your brain until you can figure out the solution. Work out, and you know, if you have trouble finding somebody that wants to talk to you about this, I'm around somewhere. I'm sure there's a lot of people that got degrees in science that never actually rediscovered the Pythagorean theorem. I think that's one of the truths of science, quote unquote, that LaRouche discusses on the subject of metaphor. Ask yourself, do you really understand the principle of the Pythagorean theorem? Can you prove it? Can you demonstrate to someone else? I think it'd be a very agapic thing to challenge that. Back in the 90s, I was with some other organizers. We set up a book table out at the prestigious institution known as Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And we challenged the students to prove the Pythagorean theorem. Most of them were far too busy with important endeavors to pay any attention to us with our book table. But we had a few very interesting conversations where there was one young man in particular he became completely freaked out that he realized that he couldn't prove the Pythagorean theorem that he's probably known for 5 years. And here he is spending thousands of dollars on tuition at MIT. So I said, here, why don't you buy this Fusion magazine? It's only $3. Now he couldn't make the breakthrough. He'd rather throw his money away at MIT instead of actually learning how to discover this principle. So just quickly, Meno dialogue, Pythagorean theorem, Platonic solids. Why are there only 5 Platonic solids? And what does that mean for the way the universe works? Now, I mean, there's been a lot of hubbub about whether the Earth is round or not. Now, the proof of that is not pictures from outer space. It was known by Eratosthenes. It was proven. He developed a method which basically involves a stick and a bowl and a few friends far away. You can prove that the Earth is round through the Eratosthenes experiment. And then, I mean, there's hundreds, but these are just some that I and others have had fun with. But in terms of developing this quality of agape, as Lynn described it, as Daniel mentioned it in the first class, when we say agape, we're talking about a quality of love of humanity, love of your fellow man, love of beauty, love of truth, love of justice. There's an emotional quality to it. I mean, what gives someone like Kepler the drive to spend decades? He's got a conception that there's a lawful ordering to the motion of the planets. And he spends years and years and years with failures and, having his, I think it was his mother accused of being a witch, getting a position at a university and then being driven out because of his religion. How do you sustain the concentration despite all of that, despite being in the middle of the 30 Years' War, to discover the harmony of the worlds, to develop a new astronomy? Well, that's a quality of love that we're talking about here. Quality of agape. You love the truth so much that the other stuff doesn't stop you. And this is a capacity that is developed through classical education. This is what we've got to develop. And you have to, and of course, if you see the next box, develop labor force. Yeah, you want to have people who have the brains to operate lasers. I mean, it doesn't take that much to operate a shovel, but if you're going to use powerful lasers that can transform matter, you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to have a developed mind for that. But more importantly, you've got to have a character of citizen, a quality of citizen that's capable of self-government. Otherwise, the infrastructure projects, the space programs, the life and death decisions that are going to determine the future of humanity, you're not going to have the quality of citizen to take that up. And I mean, that's going to be the subject of the next class, aesthetical education. That's all part of this process. So let me wrap it up here and then we can go to the Q&A. So you see those two columns of developments in the chart. They go to the labor force and machine tool designs combined. So now you have increased power density, new infrastructure designs, all made possible by scientific discoveries, and you have a developed labor force, mentally developed labor force that can utilize these technologies. So what does this do? It increases productivity. I think the proper equation would be S over C plus V, increases. you can produce more. And you're not producing more so you can make some guy rich, some boss rich. You've got to produce more because the human race needs it. You got to be able to produce more so you have more time to develop your mind, more time to teach your kid the Pythagorean theorem, more time to enjoy and perform in classical music. So from there, then we have the big one there, increase of potential relative population density. We can talk about that more in the Q&A if it comes up, but that's the metric of success. LaRouche identified that metric, the number of people that you can support on a square mile or square kilometer of land using the developed capacities, the technological capacity that you have. That's a measure of progress in an economy. Popes Kuznetsov, the Russian scientist, proposed to identify the unit of potential relative population density as the LaRouche. So I think most of us would agree that it would be good for the world to have more LaRouches. And then at the bottom here, higher levels of development of individual creative reason. That's the purpose. That's why we're doing this. Now, it may not seem that way, but this is the kind of economy, world economy, national economy, the kind of citizen that we've got to have, that we've got to create. And the motivation, again, the motivation is agape. This is the quality that we've got to foster and encourage and grow and demand of our fellow citizens and of our leaders, of course. Well, we got to include ourselves among the leaders because we've got to make that change. And also cooperate with other nations to do the same. And I'm sure you could go through this, those who have who've done the studies, or maybe somebody else will have to do it, how this process operates in China. I'm sure that's going to be dealt with as part of our class series. So let me just stop there and then let's go to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot, Cade and Bill. Some questions have kind of come in through the YouTube chat, or at least some topics have come up. But let's go ahead and see what we have from Zoom here directly. If you want to ask a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. So also, if you'd like to email in a question, questions@laroucheorganization.com. So let's go with Gordon. Feel free to unmute yourself there, Gordon, and pose your question.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
All right, that's great. So earlier, it was mentioned that you guys don't agree with the entropic, as you described it, Marxist concept of the rate of profit. Is that correct? Or the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, I should say, because I think that was described as entropic.
I think Paul went into that in nice detail last week. And he said he could also title that class from last week, the rate of profit also rises. So it would be specifically these negentropic or anti-entropic moments of creative discovery that produce non-linear effects in the machine tool sector, and then the productive powers of labor that would not be in line with Marx's theory of the falling rate of profit, or the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Yeah.
I see. However, it is just a tendency, and any Marxist economist who has studied the subject or studied Marx will tell you that there are moments in which the rate of profit rises. There are counteracting tendencies to that tendency of the rate of profit to fall. And I don't see how it's inherently entropic, considering that when we're solely talking about this economic profit, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall only occurs because of an increase in the efficiency of labor. So it's only entropic in the sense of capitalism as a system, and not necessarily a physical economy, as you guys would say.
So I think that would be definitely the trouble with Marx then, where, I'm familiar with some Marxian theorists who specifically, take up the angle that, Marx was a critique of political economy. And I know some people just argue on that line that that's the limit of his work. And as far as that's the case, then I think that would also be our critique of that it doesn't have a real positive principled understanding of the physical economy in its entirety, and exactly how these anti-entropic moments, which do cause greater efficiency in the productive process, have the opposite effect of the falling rate of profit.
All right, I see. So then the problem is not so much we disagree with this theory based on X and X evidence. It's more so we disagree on this theory because it doesn't sufficiently explain what those anti-entropic moments are, or how they come about, rather than saying I think the tendency doesn't occur at all, or there's some evidence against it, right?
Yeah, I think it ends up being something of a deus ex machina in Marx's work, where it's necessitated by the actuality of history, since that the physical economy itself did not just boil down to nothing over time, very similar to Newton's watchmaker's paradox or clockmaker's paradox. But just the fact that there is still something of a physical economy in Marx's time would necessitate something of an anti-entropic force within the physical economy. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Let me say something about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Bill.
I mean, yeah, if you look at what the population of the Earth would be, LaRouche talked about this all the time. If you don't have it, if you're living in a hunting gathering society, you could maybe support 10 million humans on the planet, the entire planet. Well, now we've got 7 billion humans, close to 8 billion. Now, admittedly, a lot of them are living in bad situations, but there's nothing necessary about that. Now, how do you go from 10 million to 8 billion? And what's the limit of that process? Is there a limit? I mean, we know what the means was that humanity was able to make that transformation. It's because of the development of new ideas and the application of those ideas to human practice. Now, doesn't that say something about what human activity really is, or what an economy should be? Shouldn't it be based on the principle that made it possible for that development to occur? That's what I meant when I said that this is coherent with the principle of development of the universe. I mean, apparently the non-biological realm, I guess, well, I might be getting into Vernadsky a bit here, but the living world on Earth developed out of the non-living, and then from a planet dominated by life emerged mankind. Now that tells you something pretty fundamental about the universe. You go from non-living matter to living matter, which transforms the non-living matter, transforms the entire planet. And then in a very relatively short period of time after that, out of life emerges mankind and completely transforms the planet. And not only do we have we're just getting started, we can transform the planet for the sake of future generations of humans. And of course, we should be shaping other planets as well. That's another possibility. So I don't, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, it doesn't seem like it's anything essential to the human race, maybe to bankers and speculators. I'll just leave it there.
Bill, could I ask you something there? Just, you had said that, that from non-living came life, and then from life came human beings. You're saying from, I don't know if you meant that only in like a temporal way or
well, it sure looks that way.
Okay, all right.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
There's something more to it than that, which gets into this analysis thesis that we were talking about earlier.
All right. Let me I'm gonna, in that case, pull together let me pose something from that similar that came from the YouTube, and then we'll go to Fred with the next question. Anyone else on Zoom who'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand, and you'll be able to be called on. So one of the things that came up in the YouTube chat was about the danger of new technologies, or perception of the danger of new technologies, of improving machine tools in particular, but in general, that a growth of technology can actually be bad for people by displacing jobs, making it so that people can't work and become, essentially slaves to tech overlords, something along these lines. Is this something inherent about the growth of technology? Is this a challenge that technology itself poses? What do you think about that?
Cade, you want to go first?
Sure. I'd see it as a result of limited development under a monetarist system. And while there's real effects of things that can look like that in if you take it just in part, when you look at the totality of the direction of an economy, if those are the effects that you're having, you are looking at a downwardly spiraling economy generally, even if there's certain technological aspects that seem to be improving. I'd say that's because you're not putting the full capacity of the productive powers of labor to use. And if you're using the technology basically to degrade the individual citizen and the average person, you're going to minimize the fundamental discoveries you're going to be able to produce. You're even going to minimize the type of discoveries you can make even within the machine tool sector. So even just having technological advances within a current set of theorem lattice of hypothesis requires a developed workforce and skilled labor force that's humanistically trained and having that experience on the production line to then give breakthrough suggestions, even if they aren't at a fundamental scientific level. So because of the entropic force that would occur without fundamental discovery, that's indicative of it's a symptom of a larger problem within your economy. It is not a principle of technology, is how I put it, at least.
Bill, would you like to add anything?
Well, I can't think that highlights the left side of that process of the machine tool principle. You've got to develop the citizens. You've got to create people who are capable of self-government or qualified self-government. And again, this is, I don't want to step on the next class, but you've got to, you're not just teaching people scientific principles or in teaching them how to operate machinery. You're teaching them to be better people. This quality of agape, this, I mean, it's in our government. Our country was founded, the principle was stated that all men are created equal, that we have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's right there. That's why there's a country. And then if you look at the Constitution, the preamble, the statement the same way. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, and the principles are stated. That's the purpose of the government. Now, you need people that are not going to be slaves. This country was founded against the principle of slavery, and yes, we had to fight that out in a civil war because compromises were made that didn't resolve that. And this is a fight now. I mean, Lynn wrote, again, referring to the first class, Lynn wrote a paper in 1983 called The Science of the Human Mind. I remember the last sentence of that paper. It said that truth only exists in the form of polemics against evil and falsehood. Now, compare that to what you get on the internet. Compare that to the way social media operates, except when we're doing it. You know, and you don't, I mean, if you're trying to enslave people, you want to abuse people, you don't need technology for that. You need, you know, a rock, a fist. You need an evil oligarchy, you know, evil systems of oppression. It's not a function of technology. You can make a nuclear power plant or you can make a nuclear bomb. Anyway, I think that's enough for that.
Okay, we'll next turn to Fred, Steve, and Linda. So Fred, go ahead and unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure can, hi.
Hey, hi everybody. I have a question for the participants and the host, Jason, and I would like to reserve the right to respond to their answers once they said what they got to say. In 1941, when the United States entered World War II, 2 years after it had begun, our military was not highly rated. We didn't maintain a standing military between wars. It was probably maybe 8th in the world. Our economy was not the strongest in the world. Yet, it's universally acknowledged that it was the American ability to produce that played the major role in turning the war around. And parenthetically, I will mention visiting a museum in Baltimore where they have a Liberty ship, and you can get on and you can walk aboard it and tour it. It was a cargo ship. And marvel at the fact that the United States produced one of these every day. Every single day. So my question for the participants is, what is it that is unique in American culture that allowed this level of production, and how does that relate to the machine tool principle of which we have been speaking?
Don't everybody answer at once.
Well, I mean, that is obviously a quality that existed amongst the leaders in history that understood this idea. If you look at the Hamilton's report on the subject of manufacturers, we understood that leadership understood that. Abraham Lincoln understood that. The Centennial Exposition demonstrates that the progress of technology, it was understood to be fundamental to any success in the country. I don't think it's unique to the United States, but that is a very, very concentrated expression of it. Tragically, or I guess it's not so tragically, it does seem to be that in history, war mobilizations tend to bring that out because of the existential threat of the enemy. But it's not necessary I mean, these mobilizations are possible without a war. Of course, the Apollo, even though Apollo was sort of like motivated in part by the Cold War, it wasn't a war mobilization, and it generated a leap forward in technology and productivity in the United States that we have yet to replicate. And of course, LaRouche specified how to do that when he created the concept of the Strategic Defense Initiative, and how the spin-off effect of the development of the technologies could revolutionize the economy and create the beginnings of the Renaissance. And the strategic concept there wasn't just to develop technology to knock out missiles, but to develop technology like the lasers that we were talking about that could revolutionize the productive processes, as well as other applications for medicine. And I think that's also reflected in the mobilization, the gear up in the United States for the war. Now, this machine tool principle, it's obviously this principle of human creativity and development is mediated through the machine tool. It's not about the machine tool. It's an artifact of that process and of that that spirit. But I mean, yeah, we did something, that stunned the world, but it's not unique to the United States. We're seeing something like that happening in China, and we better see it again in the United States, because right now we're going in the exact opposite direction. I mean, that's obvious. But anyway, we'll let somebody else talk.
Well, and I just add by building on what Bill was talking about earlier with the quality of the education of the citizenry in the United States. I think because it was built upon principles differentiated from the continental European oligarchical system, provided for a type of citizen that in these moments when the principles of production were laid out and adhered to, like under Hamilton or under Lincoln and Kerry, or under like what I talked about with Walter Roeder and under FDR's administration, you can get this compounding cumulative effect of production that in a short time can have an astounding effect upon your productive capacities, due to how its further development of the citizenry has further effects upon the breakthroughs that it can produce. And I just say real quick, something that comes to my mind with this is like, you'll sometimes hear little myths about, oh, how do we have so much technological development, after the 30s and 40s? Like you haven't seen development like that in hundreds of years of time span, but then there's in a couple decades a strong, such an increase in technology. And I think because, the generation I'm in preceding, we're a couple generations into a dark age that haven't seen that kind of development in a while, and we're more likely to want to point to something like aliens and the Roswell crash or something like that. We have to explain away development through something not human, just because we've kind of lost this essence of what it means to be human, that brings our creative powers into production and develops in that way.
I mean, I'll just also add that, part of American culture was the fact that Franklin Roosevelt was the president, and that we had a strong mission for economic growth coming from his inauguration in '33, where he did not go the way of many European countries, namely fascist, and instead kicked Wall Street's ass and started a program of industrial development, so that we had the kind of infrastructure that made it possible then to have a mass military and economic buildup that really grew in its power, took up more steam by the time of the U.S. entry into World War II. So I feel like part of the concept of your question, Fred, and we'll return to you and see what you think, is that I'm concerned that it puts it might put a bit of a distinction between American culture and American politics. And the fact of the matter is, this wasn't just plucky entrepreneurs making all of this happen. It was the result also of a capability that had been put into place thanks to nearly a decade of government mobilization on economics by President Roosevelt.
I had something. This is Linda Everett.
You're after Steve, Linda. Well, I feel bad because if it's right in response to this, I'm the worst moderator. I'm a pushover.
It was responding to.
Go for it.
I yield.
No. I want to, maybe people will recall from Paul's last, maybe it was Sunday evening's class discussion, that he talked about that he had a very odd and convoluted process that was done by some study. It showed that the 30s were actually more productive than our war years. But I that's something maybe someone could speak to, because I can't remember the whole thing, except that I was impressed by it. But there's another process. It is not separate from the economics and the teaching and agape. It is the intention. It was Roosevelt's intention to save his damn country during the Depression. That was what was clear. And that was felt by people. And it is also in the process of teaching, as we spoke earlier tonight, that is agape. Why do you teach? Because you care. Why do you give of your knowledge? Because you care. And that is a process that is felt on both sides. As you give, you receive. At any rate, the point is that during that 30s, this nation went through a process beyond a productive increase, whatever, all of that. But it was a very fundamental change from what was happening from Wall Street and the rest. And FDR made that known. He cared about the country. And that is, the impoverished, he cared. And that process did something to the country, such that we were able to fight and that we were able to produce. But Paul referenced, and I would wish others could reference that, what he said on Sunday night about being more productive. I'll end there.
Fred, you just unmuted. Hi.
Yeah, hi. I think Linda is onto a point, and I kind of disagree with the point that it was just because of a war mobilization. There was something there in American culture that war mobilization drew upon. And I would like to take the case of a fairly unsavory character, Henry Ford. He was an asshole in many ways. He really was anti-Semitic. He did say history is bunk. And probably worst of all, I blame him for owning Stradivarius, Guarneri, and Amati violins and playing square dances on them. Yet, there was something in him that said completely differently than everybody around the world, including in Europe, that the automobiles should be limited to the elite, the people who can afford them. He said that this is going to be something that we can make available to every single person. And all kinds of innovations were made in terms of production, assembly lines, high wages for workers, the elimination of medieval skills such as fitters, so that between 1908 and 1930, there were over 15 million Model Ts built. Half the cars in the world were Model Ts, and they were accessible and affordable to every single person. Put that together with Edison's approach to electricity. He developed the light bulb in order to shift society from gas to electrical power. And when J.P. Morgan said, okay, we should have a separate individual power plant for each industry or each person who can afford it, he said, no, we've got to make this available to the entire population. So I think there is something there in the American idea that does not want to keep this as some type of elitist reserve for just a few, but believes that this should be the property of the entire population. That's what I'm thinking about, and how that relates to what Bill is talking about the educational. The education of the workers. There's a marvelous quote in the Henry Ford Museum from a factory manager saying, "We hope that when these new machines came in, they would be the same as the old ones, which we knew how to operate," and they sure as hell weren't. So they were required, with the new machinery that came in, to learn something new, and they did it. That was part of the culture. That's part of the interface between machine tool discovery and the education level of the population. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
May I respond to Fred's response?
Sure.
When I was asked last week to fill in for Rich Freeman for this class, one of the first things that I turned to was a class that Fred Haight just gave about the motu Theorem principle using the example of Beethoven. So I want to give him some credit for anything of value that came out of this presentation that I gave. So I'm looking forward to your class, Fred, in the next series.
All right. Okay, so we have Steve next. And then Linda, I put your hand down. I wasn't sure if that may have been a mistake. So if you did want to say more, please just raise your hand again. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, Jason, Cade, Bill, thanks for doing this here tonight. I always have a real special connection to this, almost a religious experience, to tell you the truth, whenever we discuss this machine tool principle. I mean, this is in school, we're taught that you're either an idealist or a materialist or whatever. You know, it's a little bit like the communism and whatever debates. This machine tool thing, this is Cade set it up, I think, really nicely when he discussed analysis situs, and particularly with Leibniz in the monadology, just makes this clear as the soul becomes animated, right? As a principle of change has an efficient relationship to the material world. So no, we don't have to sit down and take a poll to see, are you a believer of the idea, or are you a believer of the material experience? And then we agree to disagree. But no, this is we're discussing the reality of a relationship between ideas and their material effects. And so that's why I see this machine tool as cutting through, not just to do work in the economy, but it cuts through the bullshit of fake philosophies that are sort of designed to make us spin our wheels in opposition to in superficial opposition to one another. And and so is the machine tool, is this like is a machine tool a kind of an animation, of a material animation of an immaterial idea? I'm talking about specifically, again, we're talking about Leibniz, so not just any old idea, but the efficient, an idea of efficiency, a principle of change that again is animated by a machine tool. Right? So the machine tool itself represents clearly and directly a manifestation of an idea, tapping down into this material world of an idea made flesh. You know, is a labor union for machine tool operators a special kind of church? I don't know. I'm playing around. So, but anyway.
Can I say something? This is in response to, I mean, you brought up my boy Leibniz, so I got to say something. And also, Jason asked me a question about life arising from non-life. I think he was trying to get at something. Let me read you the first paragraph of Leibniz's Principles of Nature and Grace based on Reason. Substance is a being capable of action. It is simple or compound. Simple substance is that which has no parts. Compound substance is a collection of simple substances, or monads. Monos is a Greek word signifying unity, or that which is one. Compounds, or bodies, are pluralities, and simple substances, lives, souls, and spirits, are unities. There must of necessity be simple substances everywhere, for without simple substances, there would be no compounds. As a result, the whole of nature is full of life. Does that address your question at all, Steve?
Okay, sorry, I was unmuted. I was muted there. Oh, that's the opening lines, right? Yes, that's exactly what animated me to ask this question. Yeah. Cade, you've been doing some work on this.
Yeah, I just gotta say I definitely agree with the at least personally the idea of the sacred coming through some of these designs for sure. And you know, in the prep for this coursework, Richard Friedman recommended looking into certain different types of machine tools. And one thing in particular, I landed on a video of a 5-axis machine tool carving out an engine block all in kind of one go. And it you know, I guess it had a spiritual quality to it, at least what it seemed like to me. And especially how you're referencing the idealist, materialist, that kind of dichotomy, I would absolutely agree that an understanding of the machine tool principle firmly shows that kind of thinking to be like on a lower dimensionality of that that function of hypothesis that you know makes physical space-time, as LaRouche writes about in his on LaRouche's discovery paper. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, well, we are coming up on our planned quitting time here. So let me ask Bill, Cade, if there's just anything else that you would like to convey tonight.
Yeah, so I think you know, Stephen's remarks lead greatly into the summary I would want to give, because it would even just be to echo that to a certain extent. That if you can get past these formalist abstractions of labor and abstractions of capital and abstractions of the economy, and start to work with a principled thinking of it as a totality, why for LaRouche it was the king and queen of the sciences and not the dismal science. I think you can really point to the machine tool principle, I think, is a nice way to differentiate the style of thinking of economy from most any textbook version you're going to get.
Bill, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I don't know if we can do it here, but I'd like to see how that agape challenge is going. The classical music challenge, that's a tremendous idea. I just want to remind what I said before about working through these discoveries. I picked out the Meno and Pythagoras and platonic solids because you don't need thousands of megawatts to do the experiments. In fact, well, Jose can tell you, he's been through some of my pedagogical efforts. I think this is really, I mean, this is a way to develop your agape. The other way, another way, which is essential, is our activity around this petition for the new security architecture, new development architecture, because we've got to make that flesh too. Come on. How can we continue to be at odds with China and Russia constantly, just as an axiom? They're the bad guy. They're the enemy. It's insane. The human race can't exist under those conditions. It's only a matter of time. So, I think somebody once told me, this is funny, that well, this also came up in the first class. Remember, somebody objected to the idea that you don't have a right to your opinion? I would restate it that you have an unalienable right to discover that you were being a jerk. And I do think it's agapic to point that out to people who need it, because they're not being what they could be. You know, we need to I mean, that's agapic. Mobilize your fellow man to take up the responsibility of being a world citizen and a patriot. And it's also, I mean, our method of organizing is the Socratic dialogue. It's not people sitting around over espresso in a cafe about ideals. We have to put it into action. We're gonna make this happen. There's we've got to get Operation Ibn Sina up and running. We've got to deal with these famines. I mean, the list of the crises, but this has to end. If you think about it, if LaRouche's proposal for this strategic defense initiative and his proposal for I forget the exact title, the negotiation with the Soviet Union had been implemented in the 80s, we wouldn't be in this mess. We'd be on Mars, right? If LaRouche's plan for the proposal for the productive triangle had been implemented in 1989, 1990, we wouldn't be in this mess, right? Our constant calls for a new Bretton Woods system wouldn't be in the mess we're in. So we've got to mobilize in ourselves what's required to spread the joy of working toward a future that is worthy of mankind. So I think that's, to the person that asks, how do I develop my agape? Well, that's how you do it. Music, geometry, organizing.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Cade. Thank you to Gordon, Fred, Linda, Steve, and the YouTube chat for the questions and thoughts that came in. As far as announcements go, Sunday at 8:30 will be the section discussion. If you are a registered member of this class series and giving a recurring donation as a monthly supporter of the LaRouche organization, you'll be receiving the Zoom link for that. That's at 8:30 on Sunday. And then next Wednesday at 6:30 will be class number 4, which, as Bill hinted at, is going to be on the aesthetical education, in particular how China is implementing policies and toward that end, and how they relate to the ideas of aesthetical education as put forward by Schiller, among others, in the West. So we have those coming up, and until then, everyone is encouraged to take up the classical music challenge, the geometry challenge, the organizing challenge, the agape challenge. So thanks for joining, and see you soon.